Alright, hello and welcome back to another one of these little live discussion-y things. The magic of a face and cards here. It's great, isn't it? I don't know why my intros are so bad, they just are. But let's just go ahead and get into it. So today, we are going to be talking about Anti-Spell Fragrance, which for the longest time has been a Pendulum Hate side deck card. It's something that whenever a Pendulum deck starts taking over the format, you side in for going first, into games 2 and 3. So obviously, you can't set Pendulum scales, so they can't set them and then activate the next turn. They just can't use Pendulum cards in the actual Pendulum zones at all. However, the cards become more than just a Pendulum Hate side deck card. It obviously ranks among D-Barrier in that aspect where they each kind of shut off the Pendulum mechanic, whereas D-Barrier is only for a turn, but Anti-Spell is is forever basically. Although D-Barrier has some more versatility in being able to hit some of the backup strategies that decks might have besides their main mechanic as well, or just hitting their main mechanic obviously, which is obviously what the card's intended for. But it's a weird thing has happened where Anti-Spell has become a lot more powerful than D-Barrier. Obviously D-Barrier is at its most powerful when one deck and one mechanic is taking over the format. Something like Zoo format where 75 to 90% of what we were seeing were Zoodiac decks. So it was good to main D-Barrier because it completely shut down that deck for an entire turn. However, with Anti-Spell, even when one deck isn't taking over the format, even whenever it's not just a Pendulum deck taking over the format and taking all the top cuts and such, Anti-Spell is still being mained by some decks, things like Burning Abyss, that don't need a lot of spell cards to actually operate. And it's weird because it's metamorphosized from a Pendulum Hate card, which people still view it as, even though it's being main decked, into something that actually hits a lot of decks. There's multiple decks in this format, and there's multiple decks in general that need spells to go off, and it's an insane number of decks that this card actually hurts. But just to name some that are in the meta, we have True Draco, which needs spells, Trickstar, which needs spells, Invoked, Dinos need some spells, especially the Pills, Pen Magicians obviously. It's a card that hits way too much, and with it being a Flood deck that's main decked, it gives the decks that can run it an insane amount of advantage. If you go online playing Anti-Spell Fragrance and flip it, guaranteed that 90% of the games will end right there with a scoop, because it's something that just gives you, even though it's only a turn, even though on the surface Anti-Spell is only a turn where you set your cards and the next turn flip them and activate them, it's so much more than that because this game is so fast that one turn can be enough to kill you. Anti-Spell is also compounded by the fact that in combination with some other cards, it's more than just one turn of, slowing the game down a little bit. What it actually turns into, if you have any form of disruption, especially a, once per turn pop or some back row hate or something like that, it actually turns into something much more powerful, where it makes all of your opponent's spells that they need to function, not just power cards they're setting for some extra power in the back row, but cards they need to function susceptible to spell and trap removal. Say you have, like a quick play, say you have a Masterpiece on board and you flip Anti-Spell Fragrance. When your opponent goes to set their cards to activate on their next turn, they can't even activate quick plays on your turn, also by the way. So you have their end phase to go ahead and pop one of those cards that they set, and then you have your turn to pop one as well, so they have to start setting baits and setting cards that they actually need to function in the back row, making them susceptible and losing actual important cards to their strategy. Whereas D-Barrier is kind of a shut off for a turn, it doesn't really combo with anything and hurts you as well. It's just, Anti-Spell is just so much more powerful, especially in combination with other cards. Also, Anti-Spell has the added power of hitting every deck and essentially every mechanic. Things like True Draco or Monarchs that don't use the extra deck are also hurt by this card, so it has the advantage there. With the advent of Lynx, D-Barrier has also been reduced in power, not being able to hit the entire Link mechanic, giving decks a workaround, whereas Anti-Spell still hits decks like World Chalice or Rockets or any deck that attempts to spit out Link monsters, because once again, they can't activate their spells. Now, one example I have personally with Anti-Spell is I've actually been working on another build of Fairy Tail Stun-Again, the very misnamed deck that I was actually running as my meta / anti-meta deck for a while there. And it's basically you set up with the Wind Witches and Luna, so you set up with a Crystal Wing and a Luna and essentially some back row. And I actually opted for Anti-Spell over some more powerful cards, more surface powerful cards, like Torrential and Mirror Force, things that can completely clear your opponent's board and just get rid of all the resources if they overcommit to the board. And I actually opted for Anti-Spell over these cards just because it's so on the surface it's weaker. On the surface it doesn't have that automatic destructive power, but it's actually weaker in the fact that, you know, using those cards gives your opponent a chance to go off, gives them a chance to do something, set up a negate to get rid of those cards, to disrupt them somehow. Whereas Anti-Spell is just such a free flip it standby phase. Your opponent really doesn't have much response to it outside of, you know, maybe having a Cyclone in hand or something like that. They don't have any quick play monster effects that can pop it on the board. They don't have trap cards on the board. Hand traps obviously can't hit it. So it's just less susceptible than other power cards in the back row, while really doing so much more and being able to shut down an entire deck. Having a Mirror Force or a Torrential to out your opponent's whole board doesn't matter if they can't make it in the first place. But basically what I'm getting at here is just, this is a card that needs to go. It's something that's been around for a while. You can look even as far back as 4 years. There's a few videos here and there made about this card and saying, discussing it, whether it needs to be banned and other things of that nature, but it's always been in the more of the context of it being a pendulum hate card, of it being something that completely shuts down an entire mechanic. And that alone, I think, is enough to really get rid of this card. Again, other things like Dimensional Barrier or Solemn Strike, these are things that can hit some of those mechanics, but doesn't completely shut them down, doesn't stop them from playing the game, whereas even as someone who hates the pendulum mechanic, I don't think it's right that an entire mechanic can have one card that completely prevents it from even being activated. And at the end of the day, it's a floodgate that grants an insane amount of power to some decks, while being just not viable for other decks to main deck. In that insane amount of advantage, the fact that it's a floodgate being mained in certain decks, it's become more than just a pendulum hate card and just an unfair card in general. And I think it is time, especially with banless season looming, for Anti-Spell to make its way onto the list. Obviously, preferably a 0. I don't want this to be another Imperial Order type thing where it's just, you know, a win one of. But anyway, I'll stop rambling on about this card. So usual plugs at the end of the episodes, a link to my Twitter and to my Discord, and a link to my Patreon as well, where you can support me for making videos and all this. I got really tired of doing the long plugs, so I'm kind of shortening these and just mentioning them there. But especially the Patreon, it'd be greatly appreciated. It would help out a very broke student right now. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Hopefully see you later in a world without Anti-Spell.